Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. A couple of minutes past 3. Andy had to step out real quick, so I'm going to get us started here. But welcome everyone to the SNR Coffee and Conservation Hour. My name is Iris McFarland, and I work as the communications specialist in the Awesome Lab at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And as most of you know, the Coffee and Conservation Hour is designed to kind of help university staff and faculty, as well as state, federal, and NGO employees across the state and beyond, expand their knowledge and awareness of natural resource conservation efforts going on throughout the state. So the typical structure of this meeting is about 20 to 30 minutes for the presenter, followed by another 30 to 40 minutes of discussion or questions from the audience. And we really hope you find this meeting beneficial as we partner together as a conservation community to help achieve landscape level conservation success. Just a couple of reminders before we get started. So last month's presentation was recorded and is now available on the SNR seminar webpage and also on the Awesome Lab website if you want to go view that if you missed it or would like to see it again. And then we do have kind of a big announcement just going forward. So we're going to take a pause on Coffee and Conservation webinar until spring of 2023. Our team is working on a new, more innovative approach to how we deliver coffee and conservation that includes the development of a podcast. And so we're super excited about these changes. So stay tuned with emails as we prepare for that in spring of 2023. And then we will probably be looking for some more speakers moving into 2023, also with the development of the podcast. So also be on the lookout for more information about that. And then as always, we welcome your feedback on today's meeting as well as general input. So please check the chat later for a link to a brief survey. Today, our speaker is Keith Burns. Keith combines over 20 years of no-till farming with 10 years of teaching agriculture and computers. In addition to no-till, 2,000 acres of irrigated and dryland corn, soybeans, rye, triticale. Ooh, I think I butchered that. I don't know what that is. Peas, sunflowers, and buckwheat in South Central Nebraska. He also co-owns and operates Green Cover Seed, which is one of the major cover crop seed providers and educators in the US. Through Green Cover Seed, Keith has experimented with over 100 different cover crop types and hundreds of mixes planted into various situations, and has learned a great deal about cover crop growth, nitrogen fixation, moisture usage, and grazing utilization of cover crops. Keith was honored by the White House as a 2016 Champion of Change for Sustainable and Climate Smart Agriculture. And Keith has also developed the Smart Mix Calculator, one of the most widely used cover crop selection tools on the internet. Keith has a master's degree in agricultural education from the University of Nebraska and teaches on cover crops and soil health more than 30 times per year to various groups and audiences. Keith was also appointed by the Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts to be part of the Nebraska Healthy Soils Task Force and has had the privilege of serving as the chairman on this force. Keith's presentation is titled Regenerative Agriculture for Habitats Both Large and Small. And once again, just encourage you to ask any questions in the chat throughout. Be thinking about things that you might want to ask Keith at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Keith.
All right, great. Thanks, Iris. I appreciate the introduction there, and happy to be here with you folks today. So what I want to talk about today is how regenerative agriculture, soil health, whatever you want to call it, cover crops, how it can affect, I call it for habitats both large and small. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't matter if you have a 1 acre food plot for your deer, or you have 10,000 acres that you're grazing cattle on, or anything in between. There's a lot of benefits that can come from implementing these soil health or regenerative practices at any scale. And we've started working a lot with a lot of food plotters, and this is why I kind of have an interest in this area, is that the last couple of years we've been doing a lot more working with food plotters, and we shipped 1.5 million pounds of food plot seed out to thousands and thousands of deer hunters. And it's been really interesting and really fun to work with these, small landowners on their small plots, because they face the same problems, they have the same interests, they have the same end goals largely as what the farmers do, and a lot of the ranchers do, to improve the soil, to improve the habitat. So whether your habitat is for trying to grow big deer like you see down here in the corner, or trying to grow massive amounts of forage for your cattle. Or maybe your habitat is you're just really trying to increase your soil health for the bacteria and the fungal populations of your soil because you're growing crops. These principles that I'm going to talk about, these concepts, are going to be the same regardless of what your habitat is. And so, again, if you have the small deer plot or you have the large cattle plot, these truths are going to apply. And so what I want to talk about is a relatively new talk that I put together, and I call it the 6 fundamental truths of biograce. And what I'm talking about is biological things that we're given by God by grace. And true grace, if you get something by grace, it's free. You can't buy it. It's undeserved, and that you can't earn it, and it's unlimited, and you don't run out. And so these concepts I'm going to talk about of things that we have been gifted with, they're free, they're undeserved, and they're unlimited, and they're available to anybody who is growing crops. Again, whether it be the small food plotter or the large conventional farmer. So the first truth of biological grace is that solar energy is limitless and it's free, and plants are absolutely the best way to capture, store, and convert it to something of value. And we see that just simply through photosynthesis. I mean, you all know photosynthesis, but we often forget how important it is. It's the keystone of all of our agricultural systems. It's based on the energy of the sun, which is free. We don't have to pay for sunlight. And through that energy of that sun, we can turn CO2 and H2O, carbon dioxide and water, we can turn that into glucose, the C6H12O6, and then oxygen. And then this glucose, this is the carbon that goes throughout the system that drives the whole system and makes it all work. But the solar energy is free, but as farmers, we often forget that we're wasting a free and valuable resource when we don't have something out there growing. And so, for so many of the people that we work with, they're in a corn soybean rotation. And when I'm in a corn soybean rotation, I'm less than 50% efficient at utilizing solar energy, capturing those photons that we get from the sun for free. I can't buy them. I don't deserve them. I didn't earn them, and I'm not going to run out. It's given by grace. But if I don't have a green plant out there growing, I'm wasting what's been given to me. And so in a corn bean rotation, I'm only capturing about 50%, maybe a little bit less of that solar energy. So by utilizing a cover crop in the off season, the in-between season, I can now capture more of that solar energy. I can convert it into something of value, whether it be beef, as in this example. I can convert that into carbon for the soil. I can convert that into nitrogen for the soil. So many good things that I can do when I have a plant growing for my soil. But if we have bare ground, and again, whether it's a small food plot bare ground like this, I'm wasting that. I can't take advantage of it. So we have to get something planted. We have to have something growing. And in the case of food plots, and again, I think about this a lot because we've been working with so many deer guys. A lot of them only think about planting that food plot in the fall because that's when they're hunting. That's when they want that kill zone for their deer. But it's important to have something growing earlier in the season, not only for the deer, but especially for the soil. And so we don't like to see bare fallow soil, whether it's on a half-acre little plot or large-scale farming as well. They're equally as destructive to the soil and equally as wasteful for the sunlight that we're not capturing. BioGrace truth number 2 is that carbon is not a problem. It's free food for both plants and biology. And I really think, carbon needs to go out and hire a new public relations agency because carbon has gotten a really bad name. It's become the fall guy for all things climate related. And I'm not saying that there's not issues with it, but carbon is not a problem. It's carbon that's in the wrong place. That's the problem. We need to get it back into the soil where it once was and where it needs to go again. So carbon is the food source for plants and biology. And again, if we look at photosynthesis, we've got that free solar energy powering the system. but the carbon that drives our whole system, that is the basis of all of our food supply, of the entire food chain, we're pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere. You know, the 0.04% of the atmosphere that is CO2, plants are able to pull that carbon out, and through photosynthesis, they're turning it into that glucose sugar, that simple carbohydrate. And then from there, that becomes the building block of plants and all these much more complicated and sophisticated compounds that the plant is going to use to grow and to communicate with the soil biology. So, you know, when we think about carbon, we as farmers, as anybody that's growing a plant, we need to think of carbon as a food source for both plants and biology, and not as a contaminant or as a pollutant. And so here's how it works. It's just, you know, pretty simple. Plants are producing this carbon through photosynthesis, this glucose. It doesn't stay as glucose. It's turned into a myriad of other plant compounds. And as much as 50% of the carbon that a plant is producing through photosynthesis, it's not used for growing the plant, but it's actually leaked out through the root system, and it's fed, or it's given to the biology in the soil in exchange for the biology providing these plant services of sourcing nutrients and delivering nutrients and providing protective services for the plant. And here's a great picture. This is one of my all-time favorite pictures. This picture was taken by my friend Jimmy Emmons down in Oklahoma. He actually took this picture with his iPhone and a little camera attachment that helps him to magnify. But this is a picture of a cereal rye cover crop root, and all the little hairs coming out, those are root hairs. But the thing that I want you to notice is look at all of the liquid droplets on each of those little root hairs. You can kind of see they're round and a little bit shiny. That's the liquid carbon that the plant is pushing out into the soil as part of the photosynthetic process. And it's being pushed out into the soil to feed the biology, so that the biology can go out and source nutrients and provide protective services. Now, the reason this picture is pretty incredible, and you really hardly ever see things like this, is that if you were to just pull that cereal rye plant up out of the ground, those root hairs are very fragile and they would just fall off. And if you were to dig that cereal rye plant up and really gently wash the soil off the roots, you can preserve the root hairs. But in the process of doing that, all of those little carbon droplets get washed away in the soil as well. And so the reason that that he was able to get this picture is that this particular portion of the cereal rye root was not actually growing in the soil. It was growing in the void of a worm channel. So there was a worm channel going up and down through a soil, and this rye root was growing sideways through it. So the part that you see here was actually growing in the airspace, and it preserved all those little liquid carbon droplets. And if you think about it, start doing a little bit of math here. So what we're seeing here is maybe a 1/16 of 1 inch, you know, the diameter of a worm channel, 1/16 of 1 inch. A cereal rye plant can have 50 to 100 yards of root system times, you know, that by 1/16 of an inch. And there's 1 million cereal rye plants per acre. So start doing the math, look at all of the little droplets of carbon, multiply that up by, you know, there's that many in a 1/16 of an inch, take that into 50 yards, and then take that times 1 million. You know, we've got billions of these little liquid carbon droplets being pushed into the soil. And this cereal rye plant was only 8 to 10 inches tall. It wasn't huge. And so when we can put cover crops, when we have something growing out in the soil, we can pump a tremendous amount of carbon into the soil. Here's just a picture. This is actually Grant Woods, who we've been working with on the food plot stuff. This is some of the soil that he has built. His land is in the Ozark Mountains. Terrible, terrible soil. It's basically growing on rocks. But he has grown this soil because he keeps living plants going all of the time. And that carbon that's being put into the soil is building that soil from the rocks right on up. The third truth of biological grace is that nitrogen is free and abundant. Now, I say this, and, you know, at the same time that, you know, farmers all over the country, all over the world are spending billions of dollars to buy nitrogen. So you might say, well, Keith, how can you say nitrogen is free when we're spending all this money on it? Well, it's free because it is the vast majority of our atmosphere. So if you can see this little pie chart of the atmosphere, the little pink line right on top, That's how much carbon dioxide we have. It's about 4/100% is carbon dioxide. 78%, the big blue area, 78% is nitrogen. There's 30,000 tons of nitrogen above every acre of crop ground in the world, 30,000 tons. And so when we're buying nitrogen, we're not buying the nitrogen, we're paying for the energy that it takes to put the nitrogen in the right form. You see, because all this nitrogen in the atmosphere, it's held together as N2. It's two nitrogen molecules bonded together with a triple set of covalent bonds that is, it doesn't want to interact with anything else. And so it makes it completely inert. And the only way that you can get that into a plant is by pulling them apart and putting it into forms that the plant can use. And so, you know, as man, we have built these big expensive factories where we can do this and we can turn nitrogen into plant available forms. But what it takes man billions of dollars to do, you know, we have these tiny little bacteria that have been created for the exact same purpose. So this is Rhizobia bacteria forming colonies on the roots of a soybean plant. It's doing that same thing. It's taking those nitrogen molecules, it's pulling them apart, which takes a lot of energy. It takes the right enzymes, the right chemical reactions to do that. And then it's able to put that nitrogen into a form that the plant can use. But it only does this if the plant is willing to pay for those services with some of the carbon that it's producing through photosynthesis. So it's really an economy. It's buyers and sellers, and the plants are actually buying this nitrogen from the biology. But we have plenty of nitrogen out there. We just have to get the biology present in the soil in order to make the system work. So in the case of Grant Woods and many other grazers who are, you know, livestock based, they don't use any nitrogen inputs. They don't use any fertility inputs of any kind because they're taking advantage of that natural system. Now, if I'm trying to grow 250 bushel corn, I'm still going to have to add some nitrogen to my system unless I'm, you know, just growing huge, massive amounts of legume cover crops all the time. So the point is that we have lots of nitrogen in the system. We just have to go out and get it in the right way through the biology. Biological grace number 4. And again, remember, these are things that are free, can't buy them. They're undeserved, you know, we didn't earn them, and they're unlimited. We're not going to run out of them. So number 4 is that our soils are rich in minerals and plant nutrients. Your soils are made up of these minerals. The minerals that we're spending, again, you know, millions and billions of dollars, the phosphorus and the iron and the potassium and the, you know, copper and all of these minerals, they're in our soils. They're just they're tied up in an inorganic form that plants can't get by themselves. And so what we have to do is we have to get the biology involved to go get those minerals out of the soil and deliver them to the plant. So this picture, it comes from an article in Scientific America, but this is a highly magnified piece of feldspar. Think of it as a little grain of sand. And the little brown channels that you see in there, those are little microscopic mine shafts that mycorrhiza fungi have actually, they secrete the right chemicals, they have the right bacteria associated with them that they can actually dissolve solid rock, and they bring that liquefied mineral back to the host plant, again, in exchange for carbon that the plants will provide them. And so it's an extension of that economy where the plants are using the carbon that they produce through photosynthesis in order to purchase these minerals from the biology. Now, if you're farming in ground, in soil that has chock full of minerals, but has no biological activity, your crops will show mineral deficiencies all day long. And they'll show mineral deficiencies in almost every category. And it's not because the minerals aren't in the soil. It's just simply because God never designed plants to pull the minerals directly out of the soil. It has to go through the biology. So when we don't have the proper soil biology, we're forced to give lots of inputs into our system. So here's a picture of that mycorrhiza. This is a highly magnified picture of plant roots. You can see the little black circles kind of hanging off the side and even inside those roots. And the arbuscles, kind of the nucleus of this mycorrhiza organism, actually lives right inside the plant root. And then the little strings that you see coming out of that, that's not part of the plant. That's actually part of the fungal. That's the hyphal network. And that's what's going out into the soil. That's what's exploring. That's what's able to microscopically mine your soil for these minerals that the plants need. And the plant is communicating with the biology as to what it needs. So the mycorrhiza and other biology are delivering just the right things in just the right amounts at just the right times, because the plant is telling it through the different carbon compounds that it's exuding through its root system. It's telling it what it needs, how much it needs, and when it needs it. So it's a beautiful system. And again, in these areas where people have completely eliminated all inputs, they haven't lost their production because they've got the biology ramped up so much in their system that it's delivering the minerals that the plants need. Here's just another illustration of a plant that's highly colonized by mycorrhiza. And you can see how much of an extension of the plant root system is happening because all of the fine fungal hyphae system from the mycorrhiza. And so biological truth number 5, again, these are things that we can't buy. We didn't earn them, and we're not going to run out of them when we manage the system properly. And it's kind of what I've been talking about the whole time here. And that's that the soil biology makes the system bigger, faster, stronger, and more efficient. These processes that I'm talking about how we convert solar energy, how we get carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil, how we make that nitrogen plant available, how we liberate those minerals from the inorganic form into a form that plants can use. None of that works without the soil biology. And the biology is in the soils. Now, some soils have a lot more than others because of the method in which it's been farmed and managed. However, all soil is going to have some biology. And if you provide the right environment, if you start changing your management practices that encourages the biology, they will regrow. Those populations will recover. And sometimes you may need to add some inoculants. You may need to add some starter biology to get the system going. But if you farm in the right way, they will come. So the picture on the bottom right with the earthworms, when we were farming conventionally, we didn't have earthworms anywhere on the farm. Anywhere we did extensive tillage, there was not a single earthworm anywhere. But once we went to no-till, and especially when we started adding cover crops, the earthworms just reappeared. They came back, and now we have huge populations of earthworms that are doing fantastic things for our soil aeration, for residue management, for cycling of the nutrients. And the earthworms are cool because it's the one piece of biology that we can see. Many of these other things, you have to have a microscope to really know if you have it. But we know when we have earthworms, and we know how much good they do. And the last one, the 6th one, is that water is essential for all life and processes. Now, if you remember, my definition of grace said, you can't buy it, which you could technically say, well, you can irrigate, you can buy water, and that's true. But the rainfall, you can't buy rainfall. We didn't earn it. The rainfall is going to fall on everybody the same, whether you are living a good life or not, or regardless of what you do, you're going to get that rainfall. And then you might say, well, but rainfall is not unlimited. That third part kind of falls apart on you. And that's true. We don't always get all the rainfall that we want, but water is, you can't destroy water. It's simply in a cycle. And so it's unlimited in the fact that it's always cycling through. And our goal as farmers, as land managers, is to take advantage of the natural water cycle and get every last drop that we get into the soil. And so much of it starts with infiltration. When we're doing tillage, when we have a lot of bare soil, when we're not properly managing, maybe we overgraze, we lose so much of the rainfall that we do get because of very poor infiltration. And so what we need to do as farmers, as landowners, as managers is, number one, make sure that we are getting maximum infiltration and not losing any moisture to runoff. And then once we have that, we need to have our soils, as we increase the carbon content of our soils, we can store more of that moisture in our soil. And so, it does no good to complain about not getting rain when you only utilize 50% of the rain that you do get because you couldn't capture it or you couldn't store it. And so, as farmers, one of the most common questions after it rains is, how much rain did you get? And the only answer that I ever want to give, the only answer that anybody should really ever want to give to that question, the only response should be all of it. I got all of it. Because if you get a 2-inch rain, but you only get an inch of it in the soil and your soil can only store that much, you didn't get 2 inches of rain. You got 1 inch of rain and 1 inch of runoff. So we really need to capture all of it in order to take advantage of it. So, we do infiltration tests in different areas. And again, this is a picture from Grant Woods' field day where we were at, and we did some infiltration tests. And, he has some pretty amazing soil for doing it basically on the side of an Ozark mountain. We were getting infiltration rates of that first inch going in about 6.5 seconds, second inch going in 30 to 45 seconds, and the third inch in about a couple of minutes in his best soils. Now, where you go to where he had compaction or where he hasn't been doing the soil health principles, it was completely different. So infiltration comes as a result of soil management practices. The more diversity you have, the better soil structure you have, the more aggregation you have, the better off it's going to be. Sorry if you hear that. I'm actually in a bar watching the soccer game with this crazy lady from Argentina. So Argentina just scored, so she's doing her best to compose herself here. But now the thing with Grace is it's out there and it's available for you, but it has to be grasped and accessed, and it must be implemented and integrated into our lives in order for it to do you any good. And it's the same way with these biological graces. We can have the sunlight and the carbon and the nitrogen and the minerals and the biology and the water, but if we're not doing something to integrate those into our management practices, they really do you no good. And you're just wasting what has been given to you. And so the way that we integrate these into our farming practices, into our operations, it's simply by implementing the principles of soil health. And when we implement these principles of soil health, we take advantage of these biological graces that we've been given. And so I'm just going to quickly go through these. I know it's preaching to the choir for this group of what these soil health principles are, but it's worth reminding ourselves of what we need to do to take advantage of what's been given to us freely, what we didn't deserve, and what's virtually unlimited for us to capture if we would but set up the right system to do it. So number one, we got to keep the soil covered. If you don't keep the soil covered, you're wasting solar energy. You're going to dry out and kill much of your biology, and you won't be able to infiltrate the water that you get. So those three truths come to bear when we can keep the soil covered. So regardless, again, if you're doing a deer food plot, if you're doing large scale farming, we want to see as much cover kept on the soil surface as possible. No-till can really help that, but it's not the only answer. It has to be the whole system that's designed to do that. Principle number two, we want to minimize disturbance. And this is not just a physical disturbance of tillage. It's important to minimize that as well. But we also want to minimize the chemical disturbances that come from the overuse of herbicides, fungicides, insecticides. Those are highly disturbing to your system as well. Now, notice I didn't say we need to totally eliminate them, because these things are all tools. Tillage, herbicides, they're all tools that we use when we need them. But the thing with the tool is, if you don't need to use it, then don't use it. And you want to use the tool with the least disturbance as possible. So if we're really going to drive the system and we want to implement these biological graces, we need to figure out how to minimize disturbance within our system. Number three, we want to maximize the diversity that we have in our system. And when we do that, we really take advantage of all 6 of these biological graces. We're capturing more solar energy. We're putting more carbon into the soil. We're capturing that nitrogen because we have legumes in the system. We're liberating minerals out of the soil. We've got super huge biological activity, and we're capturing every drop of water that we get. But that all starts with diversity, and you're not going to get this if you're just doing, whether it's a food plot and you're just planting soybeans by themselves, or you're a farmer and you're planting corn, soybeans. You're not going to take advantage of all these things because you don't have the diversity in your system that you need. Number 4, we want living roots as often as possible. And that means, we need to be looking for opportunities to plant plants if we don't have perennials. Now, if you have perennials, you just manage the perennials properly, and then you do have living roots as often as possible. But if you're in a system where you're doing annual plantings, you need to figure out, how do I get something growing so it's going when my other crop dies off? So in this example, we've got corn that's matured, it's ready to be harvested. but because this operator has come in and he's seeded cover crops, he's now got the next crop growing. He's got living roots in that system, even though his cash crop is dead, and he will continue the process of putting carbon into the soil. And then the fifth principle is we want to integrate properly managed livestock. And again, if you're the small food plot guy, you can do this with the deer that you're trying to attract. If you are not the food plotter but have large scale agriculture, you do that through bringing in cattle or sheep or goats or different things like that. And I know some people don't have cattle or livestock, but you probably know somebody that does, and so you can form partnerships with them. You can have cooperative agreements where you can bring some livestock onto your land, and sometimes that's just not even possible to do. And so you can still integrate some of that, because livestock bring huge amounts of biology into the soil. Some of that can be emulated or duplicated simply by using compost, by adding manure, livestock products, because you're getting some of that biological benefit through that as well. And so what we see, if we want to create soil and build soil, much like Grant Woods has done, much like Gabe Brown, Dave Brandt, a lot of people who have had huge successes, soil is created at the intersection of plants, biology, water, carbon, nitrogen, and other minerals. In other words, it's where all 6 of these graces come together. When we get them all working properly, we can create soil, and actually create it pretty quickly and pretty effectively. And so, just to summarize, regenerative farmers at any scale, whether it's a large habitat or a small habitat, the 1 acre plot or a 1,000-acre field, we can solve many of the problems that we have environmentally. We can solve many of the problems that we have on our landscape simply by understanding these biological graces and putting them into action, and capturing solar energy and getting more carbon into the soil and having less in the atmosphere, and taking advantage of the 30,000 tons of free nitrogen that's sitting above every acre of crop ground, and pulling some of the minerals out of your soil profile instead of buying them in a jug, and encouraging the biological life that's going to drive all these systems, and then capturing and storing every drop of water that you get, and just making the system very water efficient. And then putting the soil health practices into the principles into practice. Keep your soil covered, minimize disturbance, maximize diversity, have living roots as often as possible, and then integrate properly managed livestock. When you do these things, we can really change the way that not only that the public sees us as land managers, but really we can change our environment and we can change our society. So I want to open it up to questions now, but I do want to let you know, if you are interested in these sorts of things, we've got soil health resource guides. We put these out every year. They're all free on our website. You can go and you can download them. I'm working on the 9th edition right now. It will be available in print in January, but you can go to this website link right there and download them. And you can also email me questions after we're done here. Keith@greencoverseed.com. I would be happy to answer those questions in that format as well. So, Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you to do the questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith. That was an excellent presentation. Really enjoyed that. A lot of great practices and principles that were illustrated there. So I really appreciate that. So one of the questions I see here in the chat, maybe we'll jump to that first. Charlene Brown had mentioned, what was the name of the implement on the right-hand side of the press drill in one of your previous slides?
Yeah, that's simply a roller crimper. And, that was a small one designed for food plots, but, my neighbor has a 60-foot one that's almost exactly like that. So that's designed to physically terminate cover crops, mechanically terminate cover crops by pinching and breaking the vascular system of that stem. And so it's not actually mowing it, it's not tilling it, it's not spraying it, it's just crimping the stems to where they can no longer translocate nutrients back and forth, and it ends up killing the plant. So just simply called a roller crimper.
Well, that's good question. Iris had a question. Do these principles and resource guides apply to small farms and backyard farms too?
Yeah, good question, Iris. Yes, the resource guides, what we try to do in them is we try to feature a number of different farming operations, different scales. And the principles that I talked about, the soil health principles, again, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in your garden or your yard or on 10,000 acres, the principles are going to be the same. Now, the practices that you have to use or that you're able to use to implement them, it's going to be different, because if all you have is a garden and a yard, you're not going to have a no-till drill, to go out there and do a really nice no-till planting. But there's still ways that you can implement this. Our newest guide that's coming out, edition 9 here, there's a 2-page article in there, and there's 3 different articles written by people in Southern California. They're in the Los Angeles area, and they talk about how they're using, and they buy cover crops from us, and we ship them all the way to inner city Los Angeles. And they're converting unused lots. They're converting people's backyards into these wonderful landscapes of, that are attractive to pollinators, that they're, food forests where they're harvesting vegetables. And it's changing that little community, because they're changing it from just a barren, empty, wasted lot to something that's alive and is supporting and benefiting life. So the guides do have stories, probably more with large scale farmers, but certainly we try to address both food plotters and people in their yards. A lot of times people will say, well, what can I do to my yard to make it, more regenerative or more diverse? And I just say, stop spraying your clover. Let that clover just grow, because that's what it wants. It wants that broadleaf legume out there to fix nitrogen. So stop worrying about what your neighbors think and just let the clover grow.
That's good, Keith. I like that. Yeah, Iris, that's super cool. Thanks. Yeah, with that, I'll open it to other questions if you want. You can either do what some of the others have already done, throw them in the chat, or you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you can turn your camera on, great. If not, that's okay. You can just take and give Keith a question, or vice versa, Keith. Basically, we kind of view this webinar as really an opportunity to have a chat about some of these topics. So if you have thoughts that you want to share out to folks here and kind of get some feedback from them, that would be great as well.
Yeah, well, I'll take questions first, and then I'll maybe ask 1 or 2 here.
Sure, that sounds good. So one, I'm just going to throw out while people were thinking, Keith, one of the things that I've been interested in for a while is, I moved to Nebraska about 4 years ago, and I've been thinking a lot about how do we just find, from a communication side and extension side, that's 60% of my position is extension. How do I kind of best communicate the message of regenerative ag practices, particularly where we have obviously large scale farms now in Nebraska, and trying to, I know Andrea Bache has worked with you, and we've talked a lot, her and I've talked a lot about how do we kind of make, like, even the winter, these fields turning green, so that kind of we're always having something out there, in other words, and it's actually helpful for the soil in the long term. I'm just kind of curious, kind of maybe 30,000 foot scale picture, kind of what your general opinions are on that.
Yeah. Well, I would, that's a great question. And it's a really important one, because we all run across people that need to be convinced that, the regenerative movement, soil health practices, are they really worth it? What does it really matter? And I think I would approach it, regardless of what you think about global warming, climate change, all these things, everybody understands that our climate's not the same as it used to be. Our rainfall events are less frequent, and they're more intense, they're more sporadic. And that gets a lot of press. You can't go hardly anywhere without hearing somebody talking about global warming, climate change, all these things. And so I would take that as a something that is kind of in front of everybody almost all the time, and just say, but the solution for that, it's really not that complicated. All we need to do is plant plants, let them take carbon out of the atmosphere, put it into the soil. And so basically talk about the of those biological graces that I talked about, talk about the first 2, the importance of solar energy and the importance of carbon. And just, say, we just need to get the carbon back where it belongs, and that's in the soil. And then all these other great things happen when we have high carbon soils. And, we can fix this problem. We don't need a pipeline. We don't need to pump carbon dioxide into a mine in North Dakota. We don't need huge vacuum cleaners pulling it out of the atmosphere. All we got to do is plant seeds, and we just need more things growing. And one of the most effective things to show people is, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I'm sure many of you have. It's the NASA video that shows the global CO2 concentrations throughout the course of a year. It's a fascinating thing to watch because as it goes through the course of a whole year, you'll see really high CO2 levels in the atmosphere in North America from like January through April. And then as plants start growing, as the crops start growing, those CO2 levels just drop off to almost nothing. And throughout the growing season, they stay very, very low. And then as the plants die in the fall, you just see those CO2 levels shoot right back up there. And so you can watch that and just say, what would happen to our atmosphere if we could shift the period of time when we don't have CO2 in high concentrations of the atmosphere because plants are growing? What if we could shift that a month either direction and basically just widen that out? And that's what cover crops can do. You know, we can pull CO2 on the front side and we can pull it on the back side. And what change would that make if we can just extend that? Those are things that most people are going to go, oh yeah, that makes sense, regardless if they're a farmer or not. So that's how I approach it a lot of times, especially when it's a non-farmer, because you know that kind of hits them where they live.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great point of view. And I know actually the next question here is from Nathan Pfluger. Nathan and I've chatted a lot about that, tied to the benefits of wildlife. So Nathan has here, what has been the biggest challenge in working with landowners interested in food plots? Is it shipping seed on a smaller scale, or is the mindset of the person putting the food plot in?
Yeah, great question, Nathan. You know, food plotters are, I guess, no different than farmers. It's much more acceptable to have an $80 bag of seed with free shipping than it is to have a $40 bag of seed with $40 shipping. I don't know why that is. I think Amazon has spoiled us all. But yes, we have to offer free shipping. So shipping is a big deal. There's no doubt about it. And we can be very competitive with anybody anywhere in the country if somebody's ordering a whole pallet of seed. But if they're getting enough for half an acre and I'm shipping it out in a UPS box, we definitely have a competitive disadvantage against, you know, somebody who's providing that more locally. So certainly shipping has been an issue. We're working on coming up with some new and innovative ways of trying to, you know, have different ways to distribute. But I think in the long run, it probably still is that mindset of the person putting it in. Certainly for the larger scale farmers, it's mostly a mindset. Now, we're very fortunate, Nathan, and you know this too, that, you know, because we're connected with Grant Woods, you know, when Grant puts an episode out on YouTube or on his own channel there, I've listened to a lot of his talks, and he could give that talk at No Till in the Plains or any soil health event that farmers are at, because he's got such a good grasp of soil health principles. He's just implementing on very small scales, but it's the same, he's doing the same things, and he's actually got a huge advantage because he's never harvesting grain. He's not hauling anything off. So he's able to build his soils faster, and he sees these incredible results because he's not exporting those nutrients out of the system. And he sees that, and he's a great teacher. And so for the most part, the people that we're working with are people that are coming through his channel, his influence. So they've already got that right mindset. Now we get others that contact us, and we have to kind of talk them through, you know, when they say, well, what do you mean I don't have to disc it? Or, you know, how much fertilizer do I need to put on this? And you tell them, well, you really don't need to put any on if you're doing it right. And, you know, they can't get that. They can't get over that. And so, and again, it's no different from farmers. You know, you have to kind of ease your way into that mindset. And the best thing is to see somebody else doing it in person. And so if you can get those guys to a field day, or if you can get them to, you know, go to a neighbor who's doing some of these same principles, it's far, far easier than to get them to the point where they're going, oh, now I get it. Now I'm willing to give that a try.
Good. Appreciate that. Other questions that folks may have for Keith? Again, feel free, you can throw it in the chat, or you just unmute yourself.
One other thing that we've been doing for several years now, and we'll continue to do this, it's called our Milpa Garden program. And if you're not familiar with that, it might be something that you would have some interest in, or some of the folks that you work with. And the Milpa concept is simply, it's a Mesoamerican term, that the Native Americans would have been using. Think of the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash growing together. But the Milpa garden is, they would take those corn, beans, and squash, but they would add all these other things in as well, and actually growing it integrated with a forest system. And so we've kind of taken that concept of just growing food in a very diverse system, and we put together a mix. We just call it our Milpa garden mix. And so it's got like 40 different things in there that are edible, multiple kinds of squash and cucumbers and pumpkins and melons and, leafy greens and beets and all sorts of things. And it's designed to have farmers plant this on half an acre or an acre. And then it just all grows in this diverse wild community. And then you can go out and harvest things. And so we have a program called the First Acre Program. If a person is willing to donate at least 50% of what they harvest to a food bank, a homeless shelter, community groups, things like that, if you're willing to donate at least 50%, we'll give you free enough seed to cover at least an acre. And so this past year, and we got some help from the Nature Conservancy as well as Syngenta Seed to help do that this year. And we sent seed out to over 1,500 different people across the country, down into Puerto Rico. And it's just been really popular. And it's been interesting because not only are people able to harvest, some of this fresh produce, donated to people that have a need for it, which, by the way, a lot of people have no idea what to do with the squash. You almost have to give them a squash, but then also give them a lesson. And what do I do with this? It's not coming out of a bag or, coming out of Walmart. I don't know how to prepare this. But from the farmer standpoint, I think that one of the problems with our agriculture today is that farmers don't grow food anymore. We're growing feed for livestock, and we're growing fuel, for ethanol and soybean oil and things like that. Farmers are so far removed from growing something that someone's actually going to directly consume, that we forget how important it is that the practices that we use to grow these things are important to the quality of the product that's going to be harvested. And so in a small way, if a farmer plants some of this and he knows that people in his community are going to be consuming this, it changes your mindset. It changes the way that you think and consider the practices that you're going to do to put this out there. And I think that's a good change. It's a good mindset to get back into. So if any of you are interested in that, you can go to our website. We got a website called milpagarden.com. The free seed program, there's information about it out there. It'll probably be February, maybe mid-February, before we're actually got the new seed mixed up and ready to start shipping. But you can go and you can sign up and be on a waiting list if you'd like. But yeah, we'd love to get that seed out to people. And as an extension agent, or if you want to get some seed and then distribute it to other people in your community, you can certainly do that.
Well, that's great. And yeah, I see Emily here asked, Keith, what was the name of that? I can put, actually perfect. He's already ahead of the game. And I see Alexis here actually put in there, Fillmore County utilized that system last year in their community garden and worked really well. So that's awesome. That's really cool. That's a great, that's an innovative way to kind of think about implementing those things. So that's awesome.
Yeah,
So,
and again, it becomes a teaching tool as well.
Sure.
If you have that as a plot, even if it's in town or something, people are going to walk by and they're going to go, what kind of craziness is that? But it gives you the opportunity then to talk about the importance of diversity. And you can literally talk about all those soil health principles, all those biological graces, simply by standing there on your sidewalk and talking about why all these things are growing together.
Sure. That's really cool. That's awesome. Other questions from folks out there for Keith?
So what types of things, in addition to like the Milpa garden, what types of things could, a company like Green Cover, what can we be doing to help you folks as educators, as people on the front lines of working with both farmers and, homeowners, land managers? What can we do to help, whether it be, educational materials or, products? What is missing? What would make it easier for people to implement some of these practices?
That's a great question.
And if nobody answers, Andrew, you're on the hook for it. So,
well, what I was actually going to do is delegate. I wanted to ask Ron Seymour to see if he, as a senior extension educator, if he could provide some wisdom there from his perspective, being in extension for a while. Ron, are you there? Maybe he's multitasking.
Oh, I'm here.
Ron, did you hear Keith's question? What are your thoughts on that? I'm kind of curious, since you've been with extension for a little while and you engage a lot with farmers.
Sure. So Keith, glad you're here. Appreciated your presentation. So I have some thoughts about putting in cover crops in general. And I do wonder why farmers don't do this more. And I think there are two things that are happening. One, we have a disconnect between row crop agriculture and animal agriculture. And, our programs certainly reward growing commodities on ground on a high production level. And it can fit with livestock, and we see it happen. And I'm glad to see that, but I would love to see more of it. And I think part of the issue is that farmers that are growing a row crop are so busy getting that crop out that they don't want to make the time to put in a cover crop behind, or to try to figure out, how do I get a cover crop in so that I can have it growing before I harvest? And I think they need some help. I think they need a partnership with somebody who has livestock, who wants to utilize A, the stocks, and B, the enhanced forage that can be available from a cover crop going in after the main crop. And that partnership would set up so that the person with the livestock would plant the cover crop and put it in. And then they would then follow up with the livestock person would do the fencing, provide the water, they do everything. And so the crop grower then gets his ground better utilized. He can actually get they can get some lease out of it. The livestock grower gets some advantages. And so it's a matter of putting those people together, I think. If we can do more of that, I think we'll see a lot more cover crops grown. I still do see people that are concerned about having livestock on their crop ground. And all the research shows that it's not a big deal. And we just need to keep putting it out there. And there are some folks that really see the light. I see farmers that as soon as their soybeans are out of the field, or even as they're harvesting, somebody or they are coming in with a drill, putting a cover crop in behind, because they want to grow enough feed for some cattle to make some additional funds. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good. There's a lot of guys, Ron, between you and me, that have plenty of time to do fall tillage. They'd have plenty of time to pull a drill through there if they got time to pull a disc. I do see there's a question here on concern of spillover into native prairie restorations. I don't think that there is. And in fact, we have tried to, we get a lot of requests for people that want to diversify perennial pastures and try to get some additional things started in there. And man, that is super hard to do, because once a perennial is established, there's little small chance that an annual is going to come in and take over very much. And if it does, it probably means that perennial is pretty weak, or needs to be rotated out or something anyway. So never really seen any issues with native prairie restorations. Now, possibly if you are in the process of doing that restoration and you're just starting, you would definitely want to make sure you were using the right annual plants as nurse crops to kind of help it along. You wouldn't want to, put something out there that's going to create a big seed bank and potentially be issues for down the road. But if it's a well-established perennial or CRP field, you're not going to see any of these cover crops come in. And in fact, it's kind of funny. I'll just tell one little story here, maybe before we leave. We have a neighbor here, large farmer, and he farms right next to us on many fields, and he sees us using cover crops all the time. And and I don't think he's ever opposed to it. He just never got around to doing it. Well, last year, the co-op accidentally that somebody was flying cereal rye on, and they got the wrong field, and so they spread an entire quarter for our neighbor, and he loved it so much he ordered 3 semi loads of rye this fall, and he planted almost all his acres. So maybe what we need to do is just hire the co-op to go. I'm not even going to say the rest, but I'll let you fill in the blanks. But the point is a lot of people really like it once they see it, and they see what it does to the soil, and they see what it does for weed suppression and for infiltration rates. So we just need to get more people taking a hard look at it and what it can do for them.
Well, I can speak from the wildlife standpoint. A property that I hunt out near Utica, Nebraska, the landowner's been doing cover crops there for years. And you can tell from this deer activity as an example, once the crops are cut and all the neighboring fields, the deer just start moving right to those areas that have been in cover crops for years. Of course, he does corn and bean operation there, but and he comes in right afterwards and plants a cereal rye or something, and he has different mixtures he puts in, and it's just been amazing to kind of see the activity just shift immediately right after harvest concludes. So that's good. That's a great question. One last question here Nathan has. We have actually used cover crops ahead of perennial plantings because they missed their perennial seeding window. And year 3 of the perennial plant is looking great. Cover crop biomass was drilled into it and did a great job controlling annual weeds and holding moisture for the perennial seeding. That's good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, appreciate that, Nathan. Well, I know we're up at 3 o'clock. I want to be sensitive of everybody's time. Keith, thanks so much again. I really appreciate it. Concluding out here for the end of the year. And again, we'll have the upcoming, or we'll have the video posted here shortly thereafter, next couple of days or so of this presentation. And I think, as Iris mentioned earlier, before I was able to jump on, we're going to be postponing for the next couple of months or so, coming back in spring of 2023 as we work on kind of retooling and creating some new innovative ways with the podcast and some other things for coffee and conservation. So again, thanks everybody so much. Enjoy your upcoming holidays, and we'll talk to you all soon in the new year.